Welcome to the deep dive. It is really great to have you with us today. For this deep dive, we are digging into a massive, meticulously detailed source.
We really are. We're looking at a very comprehensive Wikipedia article covering the Sinai and Palestine Campaign of World War I.
Right. And our mission today is to take this complex, multi-year military campaign.
One that was often, totally dismissed back in London as just a mere sideshow to the Western Front.
Exactly, a sideshow. We want to distill that down for you today. We're going to transform this incredibly dense military history into a story of incredible logistical feats, brutal desert warfare, and ultimately the literal redrawing of the modern Middle East.
It really is an astonishing piece of history. We all know the broader strokes of the First World War. Muddy trenches, right?
Yeah, the mud of France and Belgium.
Right. But the context here shifts the paradigm entirely. We are moving away from the European theater and looking at a campaign fought across vast, unforgiving deserts by a wildly diverse cast.
You're talking about the British Empire forces.
Exactly. And that meant British, Australian, New Zealand, and Indian troops fighting alongside French and Italian contingents, and the absolutely crucial fighters of the Arab Revolt.
All of them pushing against the Central Powers.
Yes, entirely focused on dismantling the combined forces of the Ottoman, German, and Austro-Hungarian empires in some of the harshest terrain on Earth.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the strategic threat to the Suez Canal in 1915 essentially forced a total rethinking of British defense in the region.
It did. The Central Powers knew the canal was the main artery of the empire. It was what cut the sailing time to India and Australia. It was vital.
The ultimate weak link. And in early 1915, a German-led Ottoman force commanded by Kress von Kressenstein crosses the Sinai Peninsula and attempts a surprise attack directly on the waterway.
They actually managed to get a couple of companies across before the British and Indian defenders repelled them.
So the attack fails.
It fails,
Yep.
yeah. But it triggers a massive realization for the British command. Sitting defensively on the western bank of the canal was no longer tenable.
Right, you can't just wait for them to show up at the banks.
Exactly. To project power and actually protect the canal, they had to push their defensive line out. They had to march eastward, straight into the harsh Sinai Desert.
Which brings us to the logistics. And reading through these source notes, the sheer scale of the engineering required is just staggering.
It is mind-blowing.
They couldn't just march an army of hundreds of thousands of men and horses into the deep desert. There was no local food, no local water. They basically had to build their environment as they moved.
What's fascinating here is how this campaign became an engineering problem of the highest order. To move across the Sinai, the British Royal Engineers constructed a massive pipeline.
Right, the water pipeline.
Yes, pushing 6 million gallons of fresh Nile water straight across the desert. And right alongside that pipeline, they were building a standard gauge railway.
At a rate of about 15 miles a month, the source says.
Which is incredibly fast for the conditions. They were laying down the industrial tracks of an empire just to keep their men alive.
And doing it over deep, shifting sand. I was looking at the notes on how they moved infantry and artillery without everything just sinking to the axles. The source mentions these things called rabbit wire roads.
Oh, the chicken wire?
Yeah. They would literally take miles of simple chicken wire mesh, roll it out side by side over the sand, and peg it to the ground. It sounds almost comically simple, but did that actually hold up the weight of an army?
It did. By dispersing the weight just enough, it kept men and light vehicles from sinking into the dunes. But you have to remember, this was a heavily mounted campaign.
Lots of horses.
Tens of thousands of horses. And they require immense amounts of water. And that pipeline couldn't be everywhere. So Australian engineers invented a brilliant device called a spear point.
I read about this. It was perforated pipe, right?
Yes, covered in fine brass mesh. They could drive it deep into the sand with a sledgehammer and immediately pump out brackish groundwater. It allowed the cavalry to operate independently from the main water pipeline for short stretches.
Even with those brilliant innovations, the environmental conditions were just brutal. The source describes wildly fluctuating temperatures.
Freezing at night, blistering during the day.
Right, and then these Khamsin dust storms. Hot southerly winds that would blow for days, turning the air into a choking haze of floating sand.
And if you were wounded in those conditions, the reality was grim.
The medical evacuation?
Yeah, the standard medical evacuation method was transporting men in cacolets, which were basically stretchers rigidly strapped to the sides of camels.
That sounds awful.
The swaying, jarring gait of a camel over rough desert terrain is explicitly described in the historical accounts as a form of travel exquisite in its agony.
Exquisite in its agony, wow. Despite the environment, though, the Allied forces, now known as the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, or EEF, pushed across the Sinai through 1916. They won victories at Romani, Maghtaba, and Rafah, but then in 1917 they hit a brick wall on the border of Palestine.
Gaza.
That wall was Gaza.
The first and second battles of Gaza in March and April 1917 were just absolute disasters for the British.
Why was it so hard to break through?
The Ottomans had spent months building incredibly strong redoubts. These are highly fortified, mutually supporting defensive earthworks and trench systems. The British relied on frontal assaults.
Treating it like the trenches in France.
Exactly, essentially trying to force Western Front tactics onto the desert border, and they were cut to pieces. The failure was so complete that the British commander, General Archibald Murray, was sacked.
Enter General Edmund Allenby, who takes over the EEF in the summer of 1917. Here's where it gets really interesting. Allenby completely throws out the traditional Western Front playbook.
He had to. He looks at the slaughter of those frontal assaults and pivots his entire strategy.
So what does he do?
He recognized that the Ottoman line stretched from Gaza on the coast all the way inland to a town called Beersheba. Gaza was the heavily fortified anchor. Beersheba, out in the desert, was the vulnerable eastern flank.
Ah, so he goes around.
Right. Allenby orchestrated a massive deception to keep the Ottomans fixated on the coast while secretly moving a massive striking force east toward Beersheba.
But the catch was water. To take Beersheba, Allenby's mounted troops had to make a huge flanking march through arid wasteland.
A literal race against thirst.
If they didn't capture the ancient water wells inside Beersheba by nightfall, the horses would die of thirst, and the entire army would face collapse. So, on October 31st, 1917, the infantry fights all day, securing the outer defenses. But as the sun starts setting, the town itself is still in Ottoman hands.
And Ottoman engineers are literally rigging the water wells with explosives.
It was a moment of absolute desperation. The horses of the Desert Mounted Corps had been without water for days.
So the order is given for something incredibly audacious.
The charge.
Yes. The 4th and 12th Australian Light Horse Regiments are ordered to charge the Ottoman trenches.
Now, these guys are mounted infantry, right? They usually ride to the battlefield, dismount, and fight on foot with rifles.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
But there's no time.
Yeah.
They leave their rifles slung, draw their 18-inch bayonets, hold them like cavalry swords, and charge.
Thousands of horses galloping full speed over open ground directly into rapid artillery and rifle fire. I had to reread that section. How did they not get completely wiped out?
The audacity of the charge actually broke the defenders' mechanics. The Ottoman defenders were so shocked by the speed of the horses coming directly at them that they failed to adjust the sights on their rifles.
Well, because the distance was closing so fast?
Exactly.
Yeah.
As the light horse rapidly closed the distance, the Ottoman bullets began firing harmlessly over the Australians' heads. They jumped their horses straight over the front-line trenches, dismounted in the rear, and engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat.
And they secured the wells.
Just before they could be detonated.
It completely broke the stalemate.
It triggered a profound domino effect. The fall of Beersheba collapsed the entire eastern flank of the Ottoman defensive line. The Ottomans were forced into a massive retreat, allowing the British to roll up the line, capture Jaffa, and by December 1917, capture Jerusalem.
Which was huge news back home.
Oh, massive. For the British public, reeling from the horrors of Passchendaele back in Europe, the fall of Jerusalem was an enormous morale boost. The loss was so catastrophic for the Ottomans that their regional commander, Jamal Pasha, resigned.
So the EEF is poised to keep rolling north and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. But then, global events suddenly hijack the local campaign.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the strategic debate happening in London. The British War Cabinet was deeply divided between the Westerners and the Easterners.
Right, the Westerners being the faction that wanted to focus all troops on defeating Germany and France.
And the Easterners, who argued for knocking Germany's allies, like the Ottoman Empire, out of the war entirely.
And in March 1918, Germany makes the decision for them. They launch a massive spring offensive on the Western Front in Europe, shattering the British lines.
And the ripple effect hits Allenby instantly. The War Office panicked. Allenby was ordered to immediately strip his army of his best, most experienced British infantry and yeomanry cavalry regiments.
The volunteer mounted forces that had been absolutely crucial to his mobility.
Gone, packed onto ships and rushed to France. Almost overnight, Palestine goes from being a top priority to a forgotten sideshow again.
Reading about how Allenby handled this is wild. He had to rebuild his army on the fly using Indian army recruits.
Many fresh from Mesopotamia or directly from India.
The source notes the sheer chaos of this reorganization. In some battalions, junior British officers were totally green and the language barrier was severe. There's this one detail about a battalion where only one Indian officer spoke English and only 2 British officers could communicate with their men.
Trying to coordinate a modern military offensive with that level of linguistic disconnect is almost unthinkable.
And he did it.
He did. And while Allenby was meticulously integrating these Indian divisions, he was leveraging another profound asset, the Arab revolt.
Right. British forces, including T.E. Lawrence, encouraged Arab forces under Emir Faisal to attack the Hejaz Railway,
which was the main logistical artery for the Ottomans. By doing that, they isolated Ottoman garrisons and tied down massive amounts of their resources.
So we fast forward to September 1918. Allenby has his army retrained, and he is finally ready to launch his masterstroke, the Battle of Megiddo.
It's a brilliant piece of deception. The British convinced the Ottomans that the attack would come from the east, near the Jordan Valley.
But that was a fake out.
Completely. They built fake horse lines in the east, they marched troops east during the day, and secretly trucked them back west at night.
So where did the actual breakthrough happen?
On the Mediterranean coast, far to the west.
And the collapse of the Ottoman forces was incredibly rapid from there.
It was. The British Royal Air Force gained total air superiority. They systematically bombed the Ottoman communication hubs and retreating columns.
In a matter of weeks, the Allied forces captured Damascus, and the source mentions that Damascus was entered almost simultaneously by the Australian Light Horse and Lawrence's Arab irregulars.
Which immediately sparked political tensions over who actually controlled the city. And then eventually they take Aleppo. But we really need to tally the grim human cost here to underscore the scale of this campaign.
Yeah, the casualties. The Allies suffered roughly 168,000 casualties. But a huge portion of that, over 100,000, were evacuated sick, mostly from diseases like malaria in the Jordan Valley.
For the Ottomans, the losses were catastrophic. Estimates put their casualties at over 230,000.
Effectively wiping out their fighting force in the region.
Yes, and directly forcing the armistice of Mudros in October 1918.
So what does this all mean? Why should you, listening to this today, care about this historical deep dive?
It matters because of the monumental legacy of this campaign. The long-lasting effect was the complete partitioning of the Ottoman Empire. Secret treaties like the Sykes-Picot Agreement led to the creation of the British mandates of Palestine and Mesopotamia and the French mandate for Syria and Lebanon.
So the map of the contemporary Middle East, the borders of Israel, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and the geopolitical tensions that exist there today, that map was literally drawn in the aftermath of these very cavalry charges and desert pipeline projects.
This raises an important question. Consider how much of our 21st century global geopolitics is just an echo of a 100-year-old conflict that the British public originally dismissed as a mere sideshow to the real war in Europe.
A sideshow that shaped the modern world.
Exactly. How many sideshows happening in the world today are actually quietly drawing the maps of tomorrow? And think about Beersheba. In the 20th century, global conflicts were largely driven by land and oil. But as we look ahead to a rapidly changing climate, will the major geopolitical conflicts of the future return to the harsh reality of 1917? Will the wars of tomorrow simply be desperate struggles over access to fresh water?
That is a fascinating and sobering thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the history behind the headlines, and we'll catch you next time.